Okay, so 2 years ago, almost to the date, I posted my first YouTube video, and it was all about how to make the best cinnamon rolls. Today, I'm going to top that. I'm going to redo the recipe, and we are at the stage right now where it is ready to bake them. So they have been sitting out on the counter. They are ready to go, ready to pop in the oven, and I'm going to show you how I got to this point right now. So we're going to start this recipe by getting our yeast ready to go. We're going to add 2 tablespoons of a dry active yeast to a small bowl. Just about a teaspoon of just a traditional granulated sugar. This is just a cane sugar. It's an organic cane sugar, but you can use whatever you have on hand. And then 1/2 cup of water. I like to make this water a little bit warm. Definitely don't make it too warm because you can kill your yeast if it's too warm, but a little bit of warmth does allow it to rise a little faster. So we're going to stir that together and just set it aside. Next up, we're going to use a large bowl. I'm using a dish tub. This dish tub happens to be the same one that I used in the first video that I ever recorded, and it's just worked great, so we're going to keep rolling with it. I'm going to crack 2 eggs into this recipe first. I'm cracking it into a little measuring cup here because if you've ever had farm fresh eggs, yes, we have our own chickens, every once in a while you get one that can be a little sketchy, and so if you crack it right into your recipe, you could ruin your recipe, and that is terrible. So I crack it in this little measuring cup first, and then I will add it to the recipe. I did get a little shell in this one, and here's a little tip for you. Shell is attracted to shell, so if you get some in your egg or in your recipe, take the actual egg shell and scoop out the little piece that you dropped in there, and that will help you get it out much faster than trying to use a spoon. The next ingredient we will use is a 1/2 cup of oil. I'm using an EVOO here, but you can use whatever oil you prefer. I have just switched our family off of using like canola oil and vegetable oils, so typically I will use organic olive oil or I will use coconut oil for any of my recipes. So today we're going to use olive oil and a couple scoops. This is 2/3 cup of a organic cane sugar. You can use whatever sugar you have on hand. Regular sugar is just fine. So then just give these a stir, and the nice thing about just stirring these up really quick is we've already got our yeast ready to go, proofing on the side. So once we get this all mixed in, our yeast likely is ready to go. That only takes about 5 minutes or so, so this should be perfect. So once all these ingredients are incorporated, grab that yeast. It should be nice and bubbly and at least doubled. You don't want it to sit too long because then it will kind of overproof a little bit before you even get it in the recipe. And I prefer to just let it get a little bit bubbly, double in size, and then add it to these other ingredients. Just stir that together really quick. And the next thing we're going to add is going to be our flour. Now I use a either all-purpose or bread flour for this. I've done both. This is a bread flour today, and we need 5 cups of this. I also leave the flour out handy because every once in a while my measuring is just a little bit off and I need to add just a tiny bit more flour to make sure I get the proper texture, and I can show you what that looks like as we go here. So I just sprinkle it across the entire surface, and then I add 2 teaspoons approximately of a kosher salt. After we add the salt, we're going to use 1 full cup of water. I like to use a really, really warm water. You could actually add like boiling water here. You just have to make sure that doesn't instantly touch the yeast mixture underneath the flour. Allow the flour to actually mellow out the heat just a tiny bit. And all this heat just does is add to the ability for the dough to proof faster. And in my house, we actually have kind of a chilly home, and that actually really helps things to move along quickly. So as you see here, I got my hands in this dough, and I just like to get it a little moistened and make sure everything's coming together, and then I decide if it needs a little extra flour. Now I did add just an extra sprinkle of flour on top of here, maybe a tablespoon or 2. This is a very sticky dough anyway. This is actually a challah dough. Challah it's like brioche in the sense that it's like a sweet, fluffy dough, but it is very sticky, and so it is going to be a little bit harder to work with because it's going to stick to your hands. But what you want the texture to feel like is you want it to be able to pull away from the sides of the bowl, and you want it to be like a really smooth, sticky ball. And it is definitely still gonna stick to your hands, but you don't want it sticking to your bowl. So that's what you're looking for. Being able to get it off the sides of your bowl is a huge indicator that you have the right texture. But don't add too much flour because you don't want it to be tough. It can start to get tough and get really hard to mix. You really want it to be nice and just, yeah, almost like a loose Play-Doh. That's kind of how I think of it. And yes, you can absolutely use a electric mixer with a dough hook on here. I don't have an electric mixer. I do everything by hand, so whatever you choose to do is excellent. Again, just know that it is going to be sticky, so it is going to stick to whatever hook you use in your electric mixer. I highly recommend a traditional dough hook because those are much easier to clean. So once we get this all mixed up, I definitely need this if you're doing it by hand. It usually takes around 10 minutes by hand, 7 to 10 minutes. I mean, you definitely want to beat this. You're not going to overwork this dough. This one, it can really be worked a lot before it starts to rise. So once it's ready to go and you have this like smooth, sticky ball, get as much as you can off your hands. Now, like I said, it's going to be very sticky, but get as much as you can off because putting this dough, really any dough, down your drain is recipe for disaster for your drains. Just don't do it. Get as much as you can off, cover your dough, set it aside, grab a cup of coffee or whatever, and just let it rise for the next hour or so. After your dough has risen, you want it to about double in size, and you can see how it really kind of filled out the bottom of this bowl. You really want to make sure you get a good rise on that because that's where you're going to get the fluffiness in your rolls. So then you're going to put a little flour on the counter. This is, again, just that bread flour, but you could use all-purpose or whatever flour you want. We are not mixing this flour into the dough at this point. We are just pulling it onto the flour, and we want to get the flour on the outsides because again, it's sticky, so we are going to try to prevent as much as possible from it sticking to the counter. This dough, when you handle it, it feels so pillowy soft. It is so fun to touch. So make sure you just get the flour on the outside. Don't knead it or incorporate it into the dough, just get it on the outside, and then we're going to actually split this in half. So this recipe makes 24 cinnamon rolls. You do not have to eat them all at one time. You can put them in the refrigerator or freeze them, or you can turn the other half of your dough into a loaf of challah because again, this is a challah dough. I do have a video on how to braid challah, so if that's something you'd like to do, I can link that in the description box below for you. Otherwise, you will have two different rolls that you will cut into 12 pieces for 24 cinnamon rolls here. Now, I actually am not going to roll these out with a rolling pin today. I like to do, now I've kind of incorporated this style into my cinnamon roll making. It's kind of just a press and dimple and like force it into the shape that I want it. I just very gently pull it to the corners. I like to get a nice rectangle going here. I don't have an exact measurement, but I would say it's probably like just over a foot long because I do cut this in 12 little pieces, and I would say they're probably about an inch thick. So I would say this is probably like a foot by, what is that, like maybe 10 inches, 10 by 12 maybe? That is a total guess, but you can do it to whatever size you want. But you saw here, all I did was dimple it and kind of gently compress it to the edges into this shape that I wanted. Now we're gonna add butter. Now, a lot of people will mix their butter with their cinnamon sugar. I don't do that. I have done that before, and I actually prefer to do it this way instead. And so I'll show you here. I use about 3 to 4 tablespoons of a softened butter. I do not heat this butter up. I also have tried that before, and I don't like the way that it reacts with the dough. I actually feel like it slightly makes it so that the inside of the dough doesn't cook as well, and it also stays, it seems to stay almost kind of gummy, and so I prefer to do it this way. So it's just a room temperature, easily spreadable butter. And again, this is about 3 to 4 tablespoons, and I'm just kind of massaging it onto the top here. And we want to get it all the way to the edges as much as possible. We are going to sprinkle our cinnamon sugar mixture on top of this, and we want to make sure we fill it out as much as we can. Now with this on my hands, I will line my pan. This is a 13 by 9 inch pan, and I'll add a little bit more butter. I do prefer using butter instead of a spray for this because the butter will react with any loose cinnamon sugar that gets on the bottom, and it caramelizes and it takes these up a notch even. So definitely just butter the bottom of your pan as much as possible, like on the sides, and just get in all the little nooks and crannies so that you get a nice even cover. And then we're going to move on to our cinnamon sugar mixture. Now in a bowl on the side here, I have mixed together 1/3 cup of a granulated sugar. I have it's the same organic cane granulated sugar that I used before. I have 1/3 cup of brown sugar, and then there's my son there, he's so silly. And then a heaping tablespoon of cinnamon. I have all three of those things just mixed in this little bowl here, and we're going to use this whole mixture and we're going to sprinkle it evenly on the top of this this dough here. And what you're going to want to do at the very edge on the right side of the screen here, well, now it's at the top side of the screen here, you want to leave just a little bit of a lip, because that's going to be where we close our dough, and we want to make sure that and actually, now that I think about it, it's upside down. It would be on the other side. It would be on the bottom for you. You want to make sure you leave a little bit of a lip so that when we close the dough, we have a little bit of buttered edge to stick together so that we have a little bit of closure. And I'll show you that here in just a moment. But spread this as much as possible to all the other sides, and then we're going to roll it up. Now, if you've never rolled a cinnamon roll like this, it's very easy, but this dough, again, it's a little sticky. You want to make sure that you don't have too much flour on the bottom, but just enough so that it's not sticking heavily to the table or the counter, whatever you're using. And you can see there's a little bit of like a twist there, and that seems to help me keep it in place. This is the way that I like to roll up my cinnamon rolls, and it just works really well. And I just go back and forth, weaving it. I'm not weaving anything, we're just rolling it. But I go back and forth, and you'll see as we get closer and closer, it stays nice and level. And then at some point you can just start rolling it up. As long as it's nice and matched on the edges, you want to make sure it's an even cinnamon roll, and you go all the way to the edges. And just, if you need to actually like force it to match, roll it inward a little bit and then just pull the edges to where you need them. This is a very flexible dough. You can just make it do what you want it to do. If it is not a perfect rectangle, just make it happen. It doesn't have to be so fussy and complicated. So here's that little lip that I was talking about. I'm going to pull it up and actually just pinch it onto the top here. I like to make sure I have a really nice little seal because it keeps all that loose cinnamon sugar inside the dough. So we'll do that all the way down, and then we're going to cut this. Now you can I use a bread knife for this, but you can also use like the thread method or the unflavored dental floss method, where you slide that underneath and pull it tight to cut it really easily and evenly. But I am just really gently slicing it with a bread knife. If you just hold this ever so slightly, like I'm not compressing it or anything, I'm really just letting the knife do the work and just sawing it back and forth, it cuts perfect. I never need to do another method because this just works for me and for this dough, and I've never had an issue. If this is something that you cannot be delicate with, definitely try the other method that I mentioned with the dental floss or the thread. All you do is you slide it underneath the dough where you want to cut it, and then cross it on top and pull it tight, and it'll slice your dough really easily for you. So once these are all sliced up and you have your 1-inch rolls, these are approximately 1-inch rolls, you'll grab your buttered pan, and then we're just going to evenly distribute them in here. I noticed that it's I do a 3-roll by 4-roll pattern. It keeps it really nice and easy. You can absolutely put these in a round pan or even a round cast iron. Just arrange them how you'd like. I like my rolls. You'll see they look like they're not going to touch in here, but as they rise and then as they bake, they all bake together really nicely, which causes them to stay nice and fluffy and just gooey, and they're just so delicious like this. So
don't worry, they will rise together and they will cook together and they will look excellent, and they're so good. So any extra cinnamon sugar that fell out from them, I will sprinkle on the top. And like I said, if some of it falls out onto the bottom of the pan, it just caramelizes and creates this delicious like caramely texture on the bottom that is absolutely amazing. So now you have two options. You need a second rise on these, and it only takes about 30 minutes or so. So you can cover them and put them directly in the refrigerator and bake them off the next morning, or you can just let them sit on your counter for about 30 minutes and then we will bake them off. If you decide to put them in the refrigerator, just do it immediately and then pull them out 30 minutes before you want to bake them off, and just let them sit for that 30 minutes while your oven is preheating or whatever, and bake them off as usual. And they turn out excellent. That's actually what I do every week, and because I prep these on Friday night to have them for Sabbath morning treats. So now we're going to move on to an icing. So many people love like a cream cheese or like a butter frosting for cinnamon rolls, and I love those as well. But my family seems to really enjoy just kind of a basic icing, which is so easy and actually a lot less work for me. So I'm down for that. But it's so simple. It's literally just powdered sugar, milk, and vanilla. And I don't have like an exact measurement because I do a different amount, I guess, every time. But I start with like a cup of powdered sugar, and then I add just a few tablespoons of milk and just a little, probably a teaspoon, no, maybe a half teaspoon of either vanilla extract or almond extract, and then just continue until I get the texture and the amount that I want. You only need a tiny bit of liquid to your powdered sugar to get an icing texture. So really just add it a little bit at a time until you get where you need to go. And it's so easy. And if you don't have, let's just say you want to get creative with it and you don't have, milk on hand, or you don't have an extract on hand. If you have like a creamer in your fridge, I often will make this with just powdered sugar and a coffee creamer. I usually have one of those like flavored coffee creamers, like Coffee Mate, not the fakey ones. I don't like those. The ones that are like real milk and real sugar. I just add a little bit of that in at a time and just get the texture I want with that, and it creates like a sweet cream flavored icing, and it's just delicious. So that's another alternative. You can also use like orange juice and some orange zest. I love making orange rolls. I have actually made those many times, and I will actually zest an orange into the rolls themselves as well as top them with the orange icing. That is probably one of my favorite ways to do this. I can definitely show those at another point in time if that's something you'd like as well. But it's really just this recipe with zest added on the inside and then just the orange icing, and that's made with powdered sugar, orange juice, and orange zest. It's so easy, and it really changes up the flavor profile. So here's the texture we're looking for. It's just a really nice, like drizzly kind of icing. And I didn't realize this was so far onto the side of the screen, but you can see it there. So that's what we're looking for. So after about 30 minutes of these rising on the counter, I did end up putting them in the oven. They were at it's a 350 degree oven for between 22 and 25 minutes. You just have to watch them because they will be a little bit different depending on your oven, but you want them really nice and golden brown like this. So these are ready to be iced, and you definitely, in my opinion, you want to ice these while they're still warm. My daughter loves to do the icing, but I was doing it today, and I don't do it as well as she does. She makes them look so pretty, but I don't douse them in icing. I actually put icing on the side so that if people want to add additional icing, that's fine. I actually prefer mine lightly iced, just like you see here, because then the cinnamon roll themselves actually shine, and they are not overpowered by an icing. But do it to your liking, however you like it. I hope this gives you the confidence you need to go make your own cinnamon rolls. So go ahead, get baking. They're going to be amazing.
don't think the smoke coming out of the oven is a good idea. That's awesome.
In the comments, what the heck? What happened to her oven?